it against great odds. Now, Clyde specifically asked me to talk about three-act structure. So let's take this statement right here. Somebody wants something badly and goes after it against great odds. And let's break this down into its three-act components. Now, when we talk about three acts, all we're talking about is three sections of a film: a beginning, a middle, and an end. An act one, and an act two, and an act three. So if we take this statement here and we divide it up into our three-act components, we have our act one, act two, and act three. The act one of this statement would be the somebody wants something badly. That's what we have to establish in the first part of our story. The somebody and the something that they want so badly. Those are the two most important things you need to establish in the opening part of your story. The person, the main character, and the thing that they want. That's your act one. Your act two, or the middle part of your story, is the journey that they go on. They have to go after it, this thing that they want so badly, and they have to go after it against great odds. So there has to be a journey, and there has to be obstacles and conflicts that they're overcoming along the way. And our act three is just the answer to the question: do they get the something they wanted so badly? So again, in summary, a story is somebody who wants something badly, they go after it against great odds, and then at the end of the story, we answer the question: do they get the something they wanted so badly? So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to take this idea of three acts and expand it even further. So what we're going to talk about now is the 10 crucial story moments. Now, I'm sure today you all have received lots of different lists of what makes a good story, et cetera, et cetera. And all those lists are great. Hang on to those lists. Those are fantastic. You want to use those as you're putting your stories together. But what I'd like to talk about now are 10 crucial moments that need to happen in your story, that need to happen in a specific order and at specific times in your story in order for your story to make sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each one of these crucial story moments and I'm going to plot them on this graph that you see on the screen here. And so you can sort of see this timeline of when these events should happen in the story. So if you look at that timeline, you'll notice that our act one is only about 25% of our story. Act two is the middle 50% of our story. And act three is the final 25% of your story. This applies no matter how long or short your story is. If I'm writing a screenplay that's 120 pages long, or it's going to be a 120-minute film, then my act one is going to be about 30 pages long. If I'm writing a script for a short film that's, let's say, 8 pages or 8 minutes long, then my act one is only going to be about 2 pages or 2 minutes. That's a lot of storytelling to do in 2 minutes, but it can be done. So I'm going to go ahead and put all of these 10 crucial story moments up on the screen so that you can see them, and then we'll walk through each one individually. So to our left, our first moment is the setup. Then we have our inciting incident. Then we have our act one break, our rising action, our act two reversal, our falling action, our false defeat, our act two break, our finale, and our denouement. So let's take a moment and let's walk through each of these beats, talk about what each one is and the importance that it serves in the story. And I will also provide my slides and notes to Clyde and Luke, so if that makes it easier for you all in taking notes, I can get you copies of this presentation as well. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The setup. That's our first moment, our first crucial story moment. There's a lot that you have to do in this setup. But the main thing that you want to do when you first start your story is you want to introduce the story world and all your characters. So the story world is basically the environment that the story is taking place in, as well as any specific rules about that world that your character and your audiences need to know. For example, if I'm telling a science fiction film or a period piece or a fantasy film that takes place outside of modern times or a world my audience is familiar with, I have to explain all the rules of that world to my audience first. And then next, I establish my protagonist. and that's my main character. It's also important in your setup that you establish the protagonist's internal weakness. I'm not going to spend a long time talking about that right now, but you'll see as we build on story how important this element comes into play later on. I usually spend 2 hours talking to my students just about the internal weakness of their protagonist. So it's a very important moment, but just make sure that we establish that our main character has a flaw. There's something inside of the main character that needs to be fixed. We have to establish that at the very beginning. In addition to the protagonist, we also need to set up our antagonist, and this is our bad guy, and also every main character in the main story. So that's what we have to do in the setup. All right, well, that moves us on to our second crucial story moment, and that's what we call our inciting incident. And this is the moment that begins your story. I tell my students that this is probably the single most important beat or moment in your entire story. Without an inciting incident, your story never happens. And what an inciting incident is a moment in the character's life that usually occurs from some outside force. This is usually a moment that's presented to our main character. And this is something that forces our character to make a decision about what they're going to do next. We also name this moment the call to adventure. And this is going to reveal to the protagonist their one single external goal. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of time here and talk about the external goal because this is just so absolutely crucial. I will sometimes have my students spend days, sometimes weeks, just perfecting their external goal. And this is the external goal of the main character, what they're trying to accomplish in the story. And the reason this needs to be very well defined and very clear is so that you as a writer know where you're going. For example, in Lord of the Rings, Frodo's external goal is to get the ring to Mount Doom. That's what he has to do, get the ring to Mount Doom. And then Peter Jackson spends about 14 hours showing Frodo going on that adventure. But without that clear direction, the writers would never know what to do. So clearly define that external goal. So if you walk away from here with nothing else, know that you must have a story with a character who has a very, very clear external goal. Now, an external goal, you don't want to make it internal. It has to be external. So if I have a character and I say that their goal is to find true love, that's a very internal goal. That's very hard to show in story, whether I'm telling a film or whether I'm writing a novel. So just finding love, I could write 1,000 different stories about a character trying to find true love. I want to define that more clearly. So if I took that goal and redefined it as the external goal of my main character is that he wants to propose to a girl before his 30th birthday, which is 2 weeks away. Now I have an extremely specific goal. And there's only about 3 or 4 stories that I could write with that goal. So the more you define that goal and limit yourself, it will actually open up the creative possibilities and tell you where to go with your story. All right, one other thing I'm going to say about the external goal, and then we'll quickly move on. The antagonist in your story shares the exact same external goal as your main character. Now, at first glance, you might think that this sounds opposite. We would say, no, the antagonist wants the exact opposite of the main character. But in a well-constructed story, the protagonist and the antagonist want the exact same thing, and that's what causes conflict. This is one of the reasons why sports stories work so well. You've got 2 teams who are vying for the same trophy. In a romance movie, you've got 2 guys going for the same girl, or 2 girls going for the same guy. Your protagonist and antagonist have to want the same thing. But the reasons they want it can be very different. Okay, enough about external goal. Let's move on to the third crucial story moment. And that's our Act 1 break. And I call this crucial decision number 1. And this is basically the moment in the story where the protagonist decides that they are, in fact, going to pursue their external goal. So the inciting incident presents the goal to them, presents the journey to them, and it's at the Act 1 break when the protagonist says, yes, I am going to do it. So when Frodo takes the ring from Gandalf and says, I'm going to go on this adventure, that's our Act 1 break. So that's all you've got to do in the first act. That's a lot of storytelling. So in an 8-page script, you got to get all that information in 2 pages. but trust me, it can be done. All right, moving on. Act 2. The first moment, crucial story moment in our Act 2 is the part that we call our rising action. Now, the rising action is the entire first half of the second act. All right, so the entire first half of the second act is our rising action. And this is when the protagonist is pursuing their goal, but they're kind of pursuing their goal at their leisure. Time is not necessarily of the essence at this point, and for the most part, our hero feels confident about the journey ahead. If your main character has to go through any sort of training, it usually happens in this section of the film. Blake Snyder, who's an incredible writing guru, said that this is the part of the story that delivers on the promise of the genre. So if I'm watching a James Bond film, probably in this section of the film, there's going to be a really cool action sequence. If I'm watching a musical, there's going to be some great song and dance numbers in this part of the story. In a sci-fi film, there's probably going to be an epic space battle during this time. This is a part of the story, the first half of the second act, where you, the writer, get to have a little bit of fun. This is where you get to deliver on the promise of the genre, but at the same time, you're still moving your character along as they pursue their goal. Now, this can only go on so long. After a while, our bad guy gets fed up with this kind of storytelling, and our antagonist says, I've had enough, and we reach our fifth crucial story moment, and that's what we call our Act 2 reversal, or our midpoint. And this is the moment where a specific action occurs that refocuses our protagonist. And the specific action usually comes about from the antagonist, and it's the antagonist demonstrating their power. Time becomes of the essence at this point, and the protagonist has to get serious about pursuing their goal. This is usually a very quick moment that happens that moves us into our sixth crucial story moment. And the sixth crucial story moment after our Act 2 reversal is our falling action. And this is the last half of the second act. So the first half of the second act is the rising action. The second half of the second act is the falling action. So in our falling action section of our story, the pressure is on. And this is a part of the story where the antagonist is just relentlessly attacking our protagonist. And they're paying specific attention to the internal weakness of our main character. Remember, we said at the beginning of the story, when we're introducing our characters, we have to introduce that our protagonist has a flaw, has some sort of internal weakness. We established that in Act 1. Well, through the first half of the second act, our antagonist begins to learn what this internal weakness is. And in the second half of the second act, the antagonist begins to use this internal weakness against our main character. This is also a section of the film where the protagonist is usually abandoned by their friends. They're left all alone to pursue this goal all by themselves. Towards the end of the falling act section, we move into the seventh crucial story moment, and that's what we call our false defeat. And this is the moment where it seems like the protagonist has lost. It looks like the bad guy is going to win, but not for long. At the end of the false defeat, usually our main character takes a moment and reassesses everything that they've gone on, usually with the help of another character, and they realize, wait a second, I've learned some lessons. I've learned to become a better person. I've grown through this process. And you know what? I am going to stand up against this antagonist, and I'm going to defeat the antagonist no matter what, even if it means my own life. So after the false defeat, we have our crucial decision number 2, and that's our Act 2 break. Now, if you remember, the crucial decision number 1 was the moment where our protagonist decided to start the adventure. Crucial decision number 2 is when our protagonist decides to end the adventure. And if you are having trouble ending your story at all, just have your main character get fed up. They're tired. They're done with the story. They want the movie to end. So the crucial decision number 2 is when the protagonist decides to end the adventure, to confront their internal weakness that they've been struggling with through the whole film. And this internal weakness is the thing that keeps them from achieving their goal. And in that crucial decision number 2, they finally decide to face the antagonist once and for all. And then that moves us into Act 3. So the first crucial story moment in Act 3 is our finale, or the final battle. And this is when the protagonist must overcome his internal weakness finally, and he must do this in order to, 1, defeat the antagonist, and 2, achieve their external goal. The finale is the ultimate moral test that your protagonist will have to face. And typically during the finale, during the final battle, any sort of crutches or cheats that the protagonist has used to defeat the antagonist earlier on, he can no longer use. So he has to face the antagonist with all the lessons he's learned and be put to the final ultimate moral test. And then our crucial story moment number 10 is our denouement. And in any well-constructed story, we always want to give our audience just a little bit more after the final battle is complete. And this is, in modern films and modern stories, this is usually just a brief scene that shows the after image. It shows us what life is like now for our hero. How shall we then live? In classic mythological structure, and in the days of Shakespeare, this moment in the story oftentimes would be an entire additional act of the story. We'd spend a lot of time with the characters to see how they changed after this journey. How did the journey affect their community? And even though we still don't have that additional act in our stories nowadays, we still have remnants of it with this denouement, this brief scene at the end of the film that just shows us what life is like now. So that's basically 3-act structure. That's a lot of information that I just threw at you. So hopefully that will be just a taste that will get you thinking about how to structure your stories. And so let me just do a brief summary real quick of everything that we've gone over. There it all is, our graph again. Our setup, inciting incident, all of our beats, all of our moments on our timeline, and when they should occur. And then in summary, let's just look at this real quickly. A 3-act story is a tale about a character who must go on a journey to achieve a very specific goal. You got to set all of that up in your Act 1. But they have to face a great antagonist along the way. And to achieve this goal, our hero must overcome their greatest internal weakness. The antagonist not only wants to achieve the same goal as our main character, but also knows about the hero's greatest weakness and uses that weakness against him through a series of vicious attacks. That's our Act 2, the journey and our antagonist attacking. And our Act 3, their conflict culminates in a final battle which reveals, number 1, whether or not the protagonist overcomes his inner weakness and defeats the antagonist, and number 2, whether or not the hero achieves their goal. So that's basic 3-act structure, and I do think, Clyde, my time is up. So hopefully that wasn't too much information, but again, I'll make sure that Clyde and Luke have these notes, and hopefully it will help you all as you're constructing your stories and you're moving ahead in the tales that you're telling your audiences.
Luke, I'm going to pass it to you, but great job, Jeremy. And I've seen 3-act structure done. You got that really well. I know that was a lot. So Luke, can you facilitate some Q&A time? And let us, if possible, Luke, see the audience. Okay, Luke, hang on a second. Go ahead and say something, Luke.
Okay, Jeremy, that was... Oh, no, we lost Jeremy again.
No,
I hear you.
Can we see Jeremy's face? The photos? Yeah.
Can they see me?
They can see you big and large now. Jeremy, thank you very much, matey. That was...
No problem.
Awesome.
Thank you.
You've completely shown up Clyde and myself now this morning. So, guys, I likewise have heard 3-act structures done many times. That was genius. Really good. Looking forward to the book you're doing with John, Jeremy.
Oh, thank you. John says hello, Luke, by the way.
Yeah, and I would want to say hello back as well, exactly, and love to take you. So, other questions in for Jeremy there? There's a lot to take on board, and you're probably thinking, what, something about that much in a story? But if you were maybe dangling Lord of the Rings there as you were hearing some of those points, you can maybe see them all come out now, or another story, or even if you have the gospel in the back of your mind, maybe that was ringing a load of bells as well, actually. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
So that's obviously a very Hollywood film structure, and if you look at more independent or European films, they may not follow that kind of structure precisely. Is there a cultural difference that people in Europe maybe, or I don't know what I'm thinking of, independent filmmakers who don't follow that kind of tightly? Did
you get that, you guys?
I did.
Yeah. Yeah. Why don't you just repeat the question real quick, Luke? I think I got it, but just make sure.
So it's a good question, which is that sounds like a Hollywood film structure, which is true. What about independent European flavored films? Maybe it's time to do eight-act structure. I don't know. Maybe we haven't got time for that now. But I mean,
sure.
Is there another thing that when it doesn't look like that, what's going on?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. And you're right. This is the structure that we see 100 times over and over and over again in Hollywood stories. However, and again, I wish I had so much time to talk about this. This is probably the structure that you're going to see in about 95% of all stories that are told. However, one of the things, when I talk about three-act structure, I talk about it in very exaggerated, extreme forms. I use examples like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, because these are just such classic examples of the hero's journey. What you're going to find, though, is you're actually going to find this structure in stories that you wouldn't even think have this particular structure. American films like Pulp Fiction or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which seem to really play with time, with characters, et cetera, those two stories actually follow this structure verbatim. So even in stories that don't seem like they have structure, oftentimes they do have this underlying structure. You'll notice even in the most subtle dramas, there's often still some character who just wants something. And it may not be as extreme or external as a gold ring. It might be much more internal. In fact, in dramas, the internal world of the story drives the story far more than the external does. One thing, too, that I'd like to say real quickly about story structure as well, this structure has also been observed in cultures since the beginning of time. Even cultures that had no relationship with each other were basically telling this same type of story. And what we've discovered is this isn't just some nice little structure that works, but the reason that we resonate with this structure is because this structure, this journey that a hero goes on in the three acts, is the same basic journey that our minds go on when we solve problems. So we experience a conflict. We struggle with different ways to do it. We have to face conflict along the way. We experience a false defeat where we think we've lost. We learn a lesson, we get up, and then we apply it to our lives and become better people. So this structure is actually, it's hardwired into our nature. It isn't just a structure someone discovered, but it's how our brains work. Again, there are all different kinds of wonderful films out there that don't necessarily follow this structure, that tend to fall more into the art house crowd. Those are fantastic films. Some of those I love. But you just have to keep in mind, for the most part, those types of films don't reach as great of an audience as films that follow this kind of structure. I have nothing against those films. I think some of those films are absolutely gorgeous. But anyways, I'll end my diatribe now on story structure.
It's great. I'm seeing Star Wars and Lost on the shelves behind you.
Oh, yes. Yes, exactly.
Does anyone else have another question?
In this structure, the hero overcomes people can win. But a lot of stories in Hamlet, everyone's dead at the end of the film. Othello ends up killing Desdemona and then kills himself. And then also some Iranian films, expecting a happy ending, but like a separation, but the people ends up divorced. I mean, what about films with sad endings?
Yeah, that is a sad ending because it isn't the way we think it ought to end. So that's how the story ought to go for our protagonist. If it doesn't, it makes it a tragedy.
Luke, I didn't hear that. Did you hear that?
Okay, so beg your pardon. The question was sometimes that the story doesn't play out like that. So King Lear, Everyone's
Yes.
dead. Yeah, it's
Yes.
bad news.
Yes. Yeah, and actually that's a very good observation. If you notice that really our character in a story is going on two journeys. They're going on an internal journey and an external journey, which basically means all good stories should have basically two endings. And we have to wrap up both those stories. And stories can end one of four different ways. They can end positively, where a character gets what they want and what they need. In other words, they achieve their external goal and their internal goal. We see these films all the time in like Disney movies and a lot of Hollywood films in this way. You can also end a film with positive irony, where a character doesn't get what they want. They fail at achieving their goal, but they do get what they need. And these films tend to feel very honest. Films like Rocky is an example of our main character loses at the end. He loses the battle, but he learns something and becomes a better person along the way. You can also have negative irony in a film where a character actually achieves their external goal, but they fail at growing on the inside. The movie Silence of the Lambs is a good example of that. Clarice Starling in that film achieves every goal that she wants to achieve. She becomes the FBI agent that she always wanted to become, and she defeats the bad guys. But the screaming lambs inside of her are never silenced. She's left tragically at the end without having grown from her journey. And then you also have negative endings where a character doesn't get what they want and they don't get what they need, which is basically any Darren Aronofsky film, which is one of the reasons why oftentimes you can only watch those types of films once. The American film Up in the Air is another example of a film where the character didn't get what they want and they didn't get what they need. So all of these endings work. A character does not have to achieve their goal. You just want to make sure it's honest and that the audience is walking away with something.
Awesome.
One more question, Luke, because we already have Brother Brian on the line. So, Brian, hold tight, but go ahead, Luke.
One more question was around? Yes.
Jeremy, we are, I don't know how much you know about the ministry that we're working with, doing TV programs, Bible teaching, writing. In what way would you talk to people in this kind of work and ministry? How would a 3-act structure help people who are preaching, telling stories, illustrations, giving examples on TV, testimonies, or even written?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that's a question that we could spend hours just talking about that one question. Just a couple of things that I tell my students here. The school that I teach at in LA, it's a faith-based school as well. And one of the first thing that I tell my students right off the bat is this. When you're writing your stories, write stories about truths you've experienced, not truths that you've just been taught. When I'm writing about something that I just learned in Sunday school, it tends to sound very flat and very untruthful. But if I'm telling stories about truths, about the Lord, about the gospel, about my own spiritual journey that I have walked out myself, and I've had to wrestle with it, and I've had to fight with it, those stories tend to seem much more honest. So first of all, tell stories about truths that you've experienced, not just truths that you've been taught. And then the second thing that I would say in terms of 3-act structure, this can work in a 2-hour film and a 30-second commercial. So again, it's just a character trying to achieve a goal who has to face obstacles. You don't need a lot of time to do that. But the main thing that I would say that I really encourage people of faith when they're constructing their stories to do is to try very hard to steer away from the idea of giving all the answers. To me, story and art works best when it causes people to ask questions, when it causes people to consider things that they wouldn't normally consider. When a piece of art is telling me how to feel and what I should think, it becomes propaganda. And our culture nowadays is very sensitive to propaganda. We see it, we smell it, and we reject it. And to me, film works best when it's just causing me to ask bigger questions, ask the right kinds of questions. The most spiritual experiences that I've ever had with film have occurred with movies that were not made by believers. They were just films that echoed gospel truth, echoed the truth of the Bible. And you could do that in your film without being heavy-handed. So again, I could talk forever about that, but I know we're short on time. So Luke, I'll turn it back over to you.
Jeremy, we're very grateful. Are you in California at the moment as well, or are you somewhere else?
I'm in Los Angeles, yes, right now.
So right now, what time is it for you?
It is it's about 6 in the morning.
Yeah, we just thank you very much. I just love my friends out there. Will you give my love to the bookers and to Rebecca and everyone? Okay,
I
thank
certainly
you,
will, Luke.
Jeremy.
Take
Thank
care.
you so much. Thank
All
you.
right, bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, a huge thanks to Jeremy. That was awesome. Brian, if you can put your video camera on, we're ready for you. Can you give us a shout out?
Hey there, Clyde. How are you? Luke?
I am well.
How's that?
We can hear you well, and I can see, yep, now we can see you.
We could for a moment.
Okay, so Brian, I'm going to introduce you, and while I'm doing that, you should have presenter control. You just have to share your screen with everyone.
Okay, here I go.
And now I can see it, and while you're getting that up and going, Brian is a dear friend of mine. He also is a writer and producer based in Southern California like Jeremy. He has extensive writing and producing credits on feature-length films like When Calls the Heart, which just actually that's the series that just premiered, right, Brian?
That's correct. Yeah, 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
This was the one 2 Saturdays ago that is a 12-episode series that is premiered on a Saturday night on the Hallmark Channel to an opening audience of 3.6 million people when fighting against a tough time slot with our American football playoffs. So great work. He's done other features, both writing and producing, The Confession by Beverly Lewis, The Shunning. He did Game Time for the Hallmark Channel, Not Easily Broken, adapted from a novel by T.D. Jakes, Saving Sarah Kane, The Last Sin Eater, all of these in the last few years. Prior to that, he served as a writer and a producer on one of our America's most beloved television series ever called Touched by an Angel that had more than 200 episodes. So anyway, Brian gets story. And so Brian teaches on story. Brian, in fact, you're going back to film the rest of the last 3 episodes soon, the next few days.
I leave today, actually.
So God bless Brian. He's leaving Southern California to go up to Canada where they're shooting the last 3 episodes. And in any event, Brian has taught on this and other topics, but I love how he does these elements of knowing when you have a good story. So Brian, take it away, and then we'll do Q&A. Actually, we did want to show the clip first, so maybe this is where...
I've got it lined up at my end, but I don't know
if...
Yeah, you guys, do you need to take the screen back over
for that? I have to take it back, yeah.
That's fine. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Luke, I'm making back to you so you can show that clip.
Okay, all right then.
Accept the presenter, and then do share screen.
Got that.
That's great.
Got that. Got that. Got that. Here we go.
Beautiful.
What are we watching? This is one of Brian's films.
There's a legend in my land about a little girl who was very young.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
One day she was swimming in a lake and her heart jumped out of her chest and swam out from her. And the little girl never returned to the island because she kept searching for her heart.
From around here, are you? I'm just curious what kind of cover is pushing up this big hill.
I said no. you have a funny?
What takes you on and on?
What is it?
We want to watch that now, Brian. Tough luck, mate. You're cancelled now.
Thank you so much, Luke.
Okay, so we're now back with you, aren't we? Yep.
I believe so.
Is that right? No, I'm still going. No, actually, I still got to get it. We've got our desktop up big time, but if you can.
He has his screen. Yeah, you just have to show it.
Okay, let's see here.
I had you, Brian. I think it just needed to just hit, slideshow. I think, hit slideshow and you're good to go, Brian. I think it's on Luke then.
Yep, you've got me then?
No.
I see you.
No.
You do.
He's got the screen, Luke.
He has?
Yes, he does.
I'll just kill that.
And Brian, you just need to go to full screen or slide play mode.
Okay. Let me get that rolling here. How's that?
I see you. So, you have it. You're full screen. Luke, you just have to make sure that that's what's showing on your end.
It is showing at this end.
All right.
And my audio volume's okay for you, Clyde?
For me, yes, but how about your end, Luke?
Yeah, we can hear you, Brian. It's loud and clear. Good.
Okay. Ready?
Go.
Oh, did I lose you?
No, you're still there. Go.
Okay. All right, guys. Yep. Thanks so much. There's a bit of a delay on that. Well, thank you so much for having me, Clyde and Luke, and all the participants in the story seminar today. I have been praying for this conference for the last several weeks, and am thrilled to be part of the presentation today. So, what I want to talk to you today about, everyone, is how to know you have a good story. It sounds like you've had some great